My guest this week is Marc Clair. He is the host of the Lions of Liberty podcast, one of the most successful libertarian podcasts in America. I brought him on to talk about the culture and political issues from a libertarian standpoint, how they may differ from liberals and conservatives, and how that may have shifted because of what's going on in the country. Here's the first segment of our interview. Marc, welcome to the show.
Charles, pleased to be here.
You were kind enough to have me on the podcast, and I'm sure we're going to get fired up and you're going to make me roar at some point. But,
it's possible. It's possible.
But I talk a lot about the culture, and of course that kind of blends into politics and the kind of things that are going on. But we all have different takes, and I like to have people on who can give you different perspectives and different views. So can you give us a bit of a high-level view of the last couple of years as you see it, coming from your personal experience and, from the libertarian political mindset?
Sure. Here, obviously, I've been podcasting in the libertarian space for about 8 years now. So I think I have a pretty good finger on the pulse of how libertarians think and how they sort of filter the world. But even before that, I don't want to get you in trouble, so I won't say his name, but there's a certain controversial host of conspiracy type shows that I was listening to way back in the day. And I wouldn't say it's funny, but it's interesting. A lot of the things this particular person used to talk about in terms of the police state, in terms of how powers could be used to suppress people, I now saw it in real life. I saw a situation where the government was literally telling people, you can't leave your house, which just seemed like a dystopian science fiction type of thing. It's not something you actually expected until you just see it. And I think it did take some time for me to really process what was going on, to the point that, it starts with you can't leave your house for 2 weeks and it ends with, stick this in your arm or you can't work anymore. And I had to really reassess the way I was filtering things as well. Because when I looked at what happened around COVID with lockdowns, with these forced jabs, these mandates, I guess the answer could always be everyone become libertarians and respect each other's rights. But that's not an answer that actually affects the world around me. And what it really caused me to do was reassess not the merits of the libertarian philosophy. I think it is a philosophy of merit, but how do I take that and apply it to the events of today? And what I realize is you can't just copy and paste even what might be a quote unquote perfect philosophy. Now, I would even at this point say if you can't utilize it directly in the real world, maybe it's not all that perfect in the first place, but you can't just take a great moral concept and copy and paste it on top of real world events. That just doesn't work. It doesn't, not only does it not work, but it doesn't compute with regular people. With most people that are involved in politics in some way, shape, or form, the everyman, I guess you might say, they're not even necessarily, I think, thinking on a deep philosophical level. And there was probably a past version of me that would snub my nose and look down at them for not thinking at things in a deep philosophical level. But guess what? Now I am a person with a family, with a kid going through real life problems. And I too don't care as much about waxing philosophical as I do about doing what will be the best thing for my family, what will keep my family safe, what will put us in the best position to thrive. So it really has caused me to change the way I look at the world, change the way I look at philosophy, and look more for, like you always talk about, for real world solutions and things we can actually do to move things in a certain direction.
I want to stick on the libertarian thing for a bit, because people have a belief about what the libertarianism is. So talk about that a bit, because I think that most people probably think libertarians are conservatives, which is crazy. So I don't think most people really understand what a true libertarian means by libertarianism. So talk about what that means.
Anything I discuss here, there's 3,000 arguments going on the sidelines about what means what. So I'll do my best to give kind of my overview of it. But in its what you might call its thinnest version, like thin libertarianism would just say, a libertarian belief is one that strictly adheres to what's called the non-aggression principle. So it's really just about finding who is this initial aggressor here, because defense is perfectly acceptable under a libertarian moral ethic. So to keep it very, very simple, if someone just, it's the difference between leaving your house to go shoot someone or being in your house when someone breaks into your house and you shooting them. It's really just about being the aggressor or not being the aggressor. Now, the issue, I think, is that when that's the only element of the philosophy is just judging on this non-aggression principle. Now, I will say, like, many libertarians are also versed in the school of Austrian economics. So there is the economic element as well. And I think on that part, the libertarians that adhere to that sort of that philosophy of economics are completely spot on. But again, it does come down to, so how do we apply this to the real world? So, I mean, I think like libertarians and their purists are completely for free markets and that sort of thing. But then we have to look at, what does a free market mean? Do we have free markets anywhere at all? Do they even exist? And the answer is kind of no. I mean, in real life, everything we do is in some way filtered through government, whether it's regulations, whether it's taxes, whether it's licensing. It's really hard to find any interaction that you could really say is pure in that sense, which is what makes describing libertarian beliefs sometimes really difficult to people who aren't nerds, who don't spend their entire lives just learning about a philosophy and reading all the greatest scholars and understanding the full scope of economics, because that's not what is right in front of people's faces. That's not how they're necessarily seeing the world. But I think one of the problems with describing like in libertarian culture is that on its base level, libertarian accepts every culture. It accepts whatever. You can believe whatever you want as long as you just adhere to this non-aggression principle. But that's a really difficult thing to do in a modern society, which is much more complex. And I think one of the biggest changes in me over the last several years has been realizing that you can't completely detach the cultural aspect from the political aspect here. And if you have a political culture that's saying we accept everybody, you're also kind of telling some people we don't accept anybody in a sort of sense too, because you're telling the conservative, yes, we accept all of this stuff that you don't believe in. So that's kind of telling them we're not really for you. Or you're telling the far left liberal, yeah, we embrace all this conservative social stuff you don't agree with. So we're kind of not for you either. So who is it for? And that is the question. And now for me, I think I have made a lot more connections and strides with conservatives as I've sort of shifted the way I look at my show over the last year or so. Because to me, the cultural aspect is extremely important. And which is something I ignored for a lot of years. I said, well, that's people do whatever they want. That's fine. But when we see the last couple of years, and when we see the people that were strongest in resisting mandates or strongest in, not closing their business or their church, it's people that had a certain set of character and a certain set of values more so than not. So I think you can't detach the cultural aspects from this. And I do believe for libertarians to see their policies take more hold politically, they really do have to look at allying with conservatives and finding the places that we overlap and connect better, because let's be honest, there's not much to ally with over there. The over there is completely insane. Over there wants my family to starve if I don't jab my child with an experimental chemical. So there's not, to me, I mean, I'm all for doing whatever works. So if in your local community there's rational Democrats like in power that you can work with, I'm 100% for that. I just don't see it as realistic or as easy a bridge to cross as I think we can now with conservatives, if we can look at the issues that we share commonalities on and try to filter our politics and our conversations through that, as opposed to just filtering everything strictly through this down the middle non-aggression principle that at the end of the day kind of doesn't mean anything in reality.
Wow. Well, see, that's the thing that kind of struck me is there's a group of people who want supreme control, and they're doing it under the guise of telling you they're only doing it to stop the people who really want control. Right. It's like, is everybody watching this? I mean, it's so obvious that this is not the case. Yeah. And so somehow we got to get people to understand that they're losing freedoms in very small drips. And they're going to wake up and see a totally different country. And it'll be like these dystopian movies where the elders who are still around, you're like, man, tell us what it was like when you were younger. Well, we could just eat what we wanted. We can go wherever we want,
do whatever we want. We could probably say
I'm already like that. I'm already like that now. I mean, like, oh yeah, I remember when we could just walk into the airport and you just wait for your family to get off the plane, and you're like, well, maybe you went through a metal detector, but you didn't even think about it because it was no big deal. And that world's gone. And it might seem like a minor thing, but every time I go to the airport, I think about that. I think about how different life is before and after 9/11, and anybody born after that will just never even know. It's completely normalized. And we're seeing the same thing now where, yeah, there's a whole battle over vaccine mandates and lockdowns, but in 20 years, the idea, we probably just have lockdowns every fall. This is what we do.
Coming up, more with Marc Clair, host of the Lions of Liberty podcast. You're listening to The Charles Love Show on AM 560, The Answer.
We return to The Charles Love Show on AM 560, The Answer. Once again, here's Charles Love.
Are you tired of summer nights in Maine?
Welcome back. I am continuing my conversation with Marc Clair, host of the Lions of Liberty podcast. And in this segment, I asked him if the radicals and social media are causing people to abandon their principles and run away from common sense. And I also asked him if the Libertarian Party has a baked-in problem in that the only way they can win and become viable is to abandon their principles and become what the other two parties are.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, and you can run away all day long from your beliefs so that you're not called. I used to be more defensive about my beliefs in general, too. I used to think, what's this person going to think if I think this? Well, guess what? That person's going to think it no matter what, no matter how you phrase it. So just say what you think, because if they were going to call you a Nazi before you said what you think, they're going to call you a Nazi and racist after what you think, because it was never about what you think. It was about who you are and what category you fit into. And I think it's interesting, too, because you do see people like this that might check every box that a Democrat would theoretically, like you're just describing, believe in, but it doesn't matter, because if they're not culturally on board with the entire thing, then they are an other as well. And I guess that's maybe where people like you and I can try to find those people and say, like, okay, you can still have a home here, in terms of you can still come talk to us. We're not going to yell at you. We're not going to call you crazy. We're not going to say you should be shunned from society. We'll sit down and talk to you about maybe why we don't agree with the minimum wage or this or that. But, we at least need to find the people that are the rational people that aren't being sucked into this thing, because everybody is getting radicalized in a way now where it's either you have to be on board with all the craziness, like everyone has to be a double cisgendered, quadruple, whatever it may be, I don't even know anymore, or you're the enemy. So I think naturally the left is going to end up, and not going to, and it already is eating itself alive with this mentality. But what's coming out the other end of that meat grinder there, and can we pick up some of the pieces? I don't know if that's the perfect analogy, but I think you know where I'm going.
It seems to me, maybe because I don't know enough about the Libertarian Party or people who are truly libertarians, but isn't probably the biggest problem? Everybody can say the size, being a third party, the two parties colluding. We've heard all that stuff. But isn't the biggest problem is like you're fighting against what you truly believe? So the Republicans kind of do this, but the Libertarians have a much tougher role. So if the Republicans say they want smaller government, and then they end up, as we both know, making the government bigger, we're making it less big. We're growing it, but we're growing it slower, right?
Tapping the brakes, if anything, yeah.
Right, so they're not really what they say. But if I'm a libertarian and we say government's too big across the board, government is encroaching on our freedoms, and I want to stop that. Doesn't it kind of, they kind of run into the wall of, when you run for office and you have a party, so now you're creating a party, right? You technically have to agree with George Washington when he left office, waving back at everybody, Jefferson and Adams, and saying, don't start parties. Right. Whatever you do, factions is bad. Do not start parties. And then, so you agree with this very minimalistic thing, and then you're going to go start a party because, like, that's the only way I can fight. Right. So then you start a party, and then you run in the same way. Then you have to raise money. So now you raise the money. So then you become.
And now you need to build coalitions. And now you need to partner with some people you don't fully agree with. And next thing, yes, this is the exact. You described it perfectly. This is the exact problem with Libertarian Party politics. Something I was a lot more in favor of 4 or 5 years ago, because at the time I just saw it as, okay, well, here's like an organization that's giving a more pure message that's really labeled, that's representing the libertarianism in the right way. Now we can talk about how the people in charge back then weren't really doing that, which is the push behind, which I'm sure you're aware of, is this Mises Caucus takeover of the Libertarian Party. The idea being those guys weren't representing libertarianism correctly. At least now we'll have the right message out there. But then that does lead to exactly what you described. So if the right message is that politics is the problem and that government is the problem and that all these politicians doing all this stuff is the problem, how can you also create be a part of this institution that is essentially following the exact same path or attempting to? The problem is it's not even following the exact same path because, and this is something that took me a long time to accept, because it's not fair and it's not right. And that doesn't matter because here's the world we're in. We do have a two-party system with the structure of our government, and it is a winner-take-all system. And a small third party is not going to be able to have electoral success outside of perhaps little pockets of like local areas where people have gotten elected to office. I'm not saying that's like something that can't happen.
Of course, but the argument is nationally, and nationally there's no hope.
Yes. Correct. No, I mean, I don't think there's any hope for anything nationally, really. Maybe just as much brake tapping as we can get. I don't know. But yeah, I mean, as terms of Libertarian Party politics, you described the problem well, because even within that takeover of the Libertarian Party, there have been, little things here or there where, well, we did have to endorse this guy because I know he doesn't really agree with us on everything, but, we had to build a coalition here, even on this tiny little small scale level. So imagine if, which I don't think is really possible, again, through no fault of the people, it is the system, though. We do have what amounts to a two-party system, even though other parties are legally allowed. It's hard for anything outside the two parties to gain power in any way. So if you're not doing if you're going to do politics and you're going to have to make coalitions, and then you're already doing the thing you didn't like, except now you have no chance to get power to actually enact the things that you want. So I think that is the issue, and that is why I have diverted away personally from the Libertarian Party path of things, because I don't see it as viable. At best, it can be a place you could point somebody to say, here's what libertarians really believe. But if that's all it is, then why do you need the political part of it? In fact, the political part of it kind of argues the other side of it. So why are you in a political party if this politics is the problem and government's the problem? So yeah, I mean, I won't give you pushback there because I think you described it really well.
Hey, when you talk about money, look at how much it costs to put forth a viable candidate. It's gotten much worse, but the best example I can think of is Ken Duncan. So Ken Duncan was a state rep in Illinois. He's a Democrat incumbent. He had sided with the Republican governor on a couple things, so the Democrats wanted him out. So Juliana Stratton, the current lieutenant governor, challenged him, and it became a proxy war between Mike Madigan, who was Speaker of the House and had run Illinois for 50 years, and Bruce Rowland, billionaire Republican governor. So Madigan decided he wanted to crush Duncan, so he put money behind Stratton, and then Rowland and Republican donors started to spend money in support of Duncan, but mostly to attack Madigan. So this local state house race gained national news and became one of the most expensive state house races in the country, with about $6 million spent between the two candidates. And it ended with Barack Obama making robocalls for Stratton. Now you got people outside money. Every time someone runs for Senate, there's 30, and that's nothing for it to be $40, $50 million. How is the Libertarians going to spend that money anyway? I think I was listening to one of your more recent podcasts, and you had Pete Quinones, and I think he had a great point. It's like, well, then use your strength and your power and your numbers as a Libertarian Party to go out and petition for an issue. And then you put your money and your influence behind anyone on this one issue, and you make it clear, we are supporting this Republican or this Democrat solely because of this issue. We are trying to get this issue passed, and then when you get that issue passed, you pat yourself on the back and you move on to another issue.
But that doesn't make anybody feel good. That doesn't make anybody, well, it does if you're into that issue, as you should be, but it doesn't, nobody gets a position of power. Nobody gets to say, look, I won the Libertarian nomination for this and that. And I think at some point, while it's nobody's intent, at some point, it just ends up becoming about that. And then, people get elected to certain positions and then they have to do this and that. But again, there's no real money behind it. And, if you really want to take action, I mean, look at the gun lobby. I mean, look at the successes of the pro-gun, pro-Second Amendment lobby in the last 10 years. It's because it is a hyper-focused I would say I'm probably a minority of people that are super, strong in that issue that care about it as their number one thing, but they're so hyper focused that they're not going to be deterred. And we have seen, in the last 10 years, how many states have had a constitutional carry, and that, right. No matter how much propaganda gets put on for the latest, Matthew McConaughey giving a speech, they cannot be budged. So I would love to, as Pete suggests, take that energy and focus that either on that. Well, that issue is doing pretty well already, but focus that on other libertarian issues and put all the power and money behind that, because A, it's going to be more successful, and B, libertarians can't raise the money in an effective way on the national level. Like you said, it's just not possible. Libertarians are not going to be able to afford Barack Obama. Not that they would want to necessarily making robocalls ever at any point. It's not realistic. So, but there are realistic ways to do politics through this coalition that's been built through this organization. So, I don't want to discourage people with similar views to gather and to affect politics, but the key is effect. So I want them to actually affect the politics, and just doing this through this Libertarian Party, I failed to see how it can be effective, even when I have the people on that support it, that are the founders or the faces of it. Even they can't really lay out how it's going to be effective. It's a lot more of just, well, let's just see where things go. When I was 25, let's just see where things go sounded great, but now people are threatening my lives if I don't stab something inside me. So yeah, things are a little different. I'm not willing to just see where things go anymore.
Coming up, more with Marc Clair, host of the Lions of Liberty podcast. You're listening to The Charles Love Show on AM 560, The Answer.
You're listening to The Charles Love Show on AM 560, The Answer, with your host, Charles Love.
Welcome back. I am continuing my conversation with Marc Clair, host of the Lions of Liberty podcast. And in the last segment, he talked about people kind of seeing the problem, but saying, well, let's just see where things go. That is the roadblock that's stopping us from making significant inroads into the problem. You have people who say, I support LGBT rights, but I also don't think that they should be pushing this in school. We should be leading our military with it, but let's see where it goes. But we know where it goes. We see where the culture has gone, and it's not just gender identity or race. I talk often about, who am I to say what's right or wrong? Let's stop keeping score. Let's give everyone a trophy. We went from not wanting people to feel bad to trying to make everyone feel good. So we know where this thing will go. So I asked Marc about their non-aggression approach and how they balance that with what is going on in the culture.
So what do you see or what do you hear from libertarians from the standpoint when they, or if they do, address the culture, right? Because I know a lot of ones, especially the people I meet, they're very more economic focused and government size and all the important, it's like when you're building a house, they're all plumbing and electric, right? But at the same time, when we walk out the door, what we see is wood floors, stainless steel appliances. Right. Look at that, a waterfall island. So do they comment on any of that? They have to have views on being called racist, but just the gender thing, the education, we need to change the way we teach education because, blacks are oppressed, all of this culture war stuff. What is the libertarian view on the culture war?
Sure. And I think that's, again, sort of part of the problem with the libertarian view is that I would say most libertarians that I know, or, the ones that I run in the same circles as I do, would agree with you and agree with me on that stuff, on forcing down this new gender ideology. What's a man? What's a woman? Or do those even exist? Everything is about race.
Well, I would assume most libertarians are against it, but their whole premise is, let people do whatever they want to do. It's non-aggression.
Right. And that's the problem. And that's exactly where the problem comes in, because having that attitude does allow the same people that believe in that stuff to come into the party and be a part of the party because, hey, they don't want to violate the non-aggression principle either. They just want to bring kids to drag shows and, bring their kids to pride parades and do all this cultural stuff that, of course, why shouldn't we be open to that? Until you realize that there's more to life than the non-aggression principle, and there's more to life than even just you can say no one has been attacked by, bringing a kid to a pride parade. but there is some cultural rot there. There is cultural degradation. And I think too many libertarians want to turn a blind eye to that and think, well, let me just check. Nope. No aggression detected, so it's fine. No, I mean that's just not reality. And I'm talking to older versions or younger versions of myself, I guess, as well, because I used to have this attitude too. Like, sure, I'll sit here thinking rationally. I'm not going to think there's no genders, but I guess if someone wants to believe that and wants to have gender fluidity in their lives, I mean, I'll never forget. I dated a girl in Los Angeles a few years ago. I mean, by dated, I mean went on like 2 dates before this came up, and I realized, I can't live in the same. This is not the same world. She started saying, well, I think the most important things to me are, the important issues like gender fluidity, like as her top issue. I'm like, I'm like, oh, we don't live on the same planet, ma'am. Now I see. Thank you very much. I guess I'll pay for dinner. But I mean, it's just you at some point you realize you almost can't share a planet with some people that believe this way. Maybe you can, but you certainly can't let them be the ones influencing your culture, and you certainly cannot allow them to be the ones guiding the conversation. At some point, the adults need to speak up, and the adults need to lead the conversation. And the libertarians need to embrace the adults and push out the children and push out the wokes, even if they don't violate the non-aggression principle per se.
And that's interesting. I expect to hear the far left pushback when you make something on social media and say, well, this is wrong, do this. But I got some of these. I got libertarian leaning people's, like I got one that said, as much as I'm totally against it and offended by parents, kids doing blah, 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 drag, blah, blah, blah. I think it's their right to do it because there's free speech. And you people who claim to be free speech absolutists, how can you do this, that, and the other? So we had a kind of gentle back and forth. And then I'm like, you're saying that a parent should be able to take their kid to a drag show. Now, we can have that argument, but you're making the assumption that it's the parent. It's not always the parent, right? Some of this stuff is in school. Like we just saw the article about New York City, who they paid to have them come into the school. So then there's that, one. But then the other thing, they're like, well, it's not like they're taking their clothes off. And I said, so you can just bring your kids to a crack house? Because last time I checked at the crack house,
they got clothes on. Yeah. Yeah.
And they're like, well, that's different. No. You're trying to draw on the line at non-aggression, whether it's impeding on your rights. But at some point, you got to say things are wrong because they're wrong, or kids are certain groups of people you do need to protect, right? So you can't say that some of these things are okay because that one person. I mean, you don't let somebody sell their kid into slavery, sex slavery, and say, well, they're the parent. I think it's terrible, but who am I to say, right? And I'm not saying that that's their intent, but that's the arguments they make. That's the defense that they, right? They say stuff like that. And it's like, it's shocking to me.
Coming up, more with Marc Clair, host of the Lions of Liberty podcast. You're listening to The Charles Love Show on AM 560, The Answer.
Now, more of the Charles Love Show on AM 560, The Answer, with your host, Charles Love.
Welcome back. I'm continuing my conversation with Marc Clair, host of the Lions of Liberty podcast. And we've been talking about libertarians and center-left, center-right people who understand what is going on in the culture, but remain silent or are strictly married to their let everyone do whatever they want to do principles. So we continue talking about how that is exacerbating the problems we're seeing in the culture. And we use the extreme push of the LGBTQ ideology as an example of this, which goes far beyond basic human rights.
It's the great libertarian trap in a way. It's when you've filtered all your ideology around everything is fine as long as they didn't physically attack me, then you're totally letting yourself become a victim of all of this because they don't live by those same principles. They realize they can attack you in a lot of ways, and they can attack your children a lot easier by normalizing certain things and by pushing it on them. So it's one thing, and maybe it's a slippery slope. So, the slippery slope, I always think of Rick Santorum when it's a name that comes up a lot now because in 2000
I have to give you a round of applause because I said the same thing. I used to mock him. I was like, he's crazy. Remember that nut? And
And he might be, but he was right. He was right. Like he said, I mean, I don't know the exact quote, but it was during the 2008 debates. He said, if we allow gay marriage, they'll eventually come for your kids. Look where we are. Who can argue with it? Now, doesn't mean I'm against gay marriage from a legal standpoint, but
I see LGBTQ people posting that on social media. You're making us look bad. We said we were not coming for the kids, and now look at us. Stop it.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I think when it was just like, your gay friends that and you don't want, you like them and don't see why they should be treated differently, it's fine. But you still, even if they're your friends, you still don't want those two gay friends coming to your house and spending, an hour telling your 8-year-old child about their relationship and the details of their sexuality. And like, that's just not appropriate. But now you can look back and see, well, they had to do the first to get to the next. They had to normalize across the board before they could say, well, of course, we're going to tell your children about it. Now that is a defense of a lot of these teachers. I see teachers, these videos on TikTok or whatever, libs of TikTok that reshares them that'll be like, well, how am I supposed to talk to my children about what my partner and I did this weekend? You're not. Right. You're not. I never knew that. Yes. I never knew any of my teachers' personal lives. Like I knew one of them like trained dogs and was like a head greyhound. That's the only thing I can remember. I never knew about my teachers' personal lives. I didn't know what the hell they did because it's not why they were there. So you don't. That's the thing. You just don't. And it's not that hard.
To understand these libertarian-minded people, as much as they want to be fair to everybody, that they should be against these people for nothing else is because they're stepping on the majority's free speech rights. Because they're so focused about these radicals' free speech. What about the rest of us? Because it's not just the example you gave. You got a gay couple and their friends. You want them to be treated like everybody else, but you don't want them to come into your house and tell their kids why they should be gay.
Right.
But now they're screaming, the people who are advocating this are also screaming that if you do say that, you're a homophobe. Well, I was just supporting gay marriage, so how am I a homophobe? Nope. If you don't agree with everything we say, then you need to shut up, or I'm going to march outside your job until you get fired, which is in and of itself suppressing my free speech. So why aren't they on board with me for that? But no, they just want to prove some ethical level point, right?
This is when you can start to realize what it's about, though. It's not about even the specific issue. It's about submission. It's about submitting to whatever you're told to submit to. And that bar is going to keep changing and keep moving. Trump wrapped himself around an LGBT flag, and he's known as the biggest, most homophobic president ever by these people for no reason that's related to policy, no real reason that's related to his personal life, no reason related to anything in reality, because it's not about reality. It's about subjugating people. It's about, you will bend the knee. And if we have to put a new standard of what makes you bend the knee, then we'll keep doing that until you bend the knee. And at some point, I think libertarians should keep their knowledge of economics and continue to filter through that, but accept the fact that there is a war being waged, an information war being waged. And if your response is, well, it's just their right to wage it on my kids, and let me just put my kids in front of the TV and let them wage it, well, then you are as much a part of that as the people you're angry at. Because now, if you allow your kids and you allow this to go unchallenged because, hey, it's everybody's right to think whatever they want, well, you're actually aiding the enemy now. You're actually a part of the problem, which is why they do it this way, because they use your ideology against you. Well, aren't you for everybody's freedom? So why can't we just blast the airwaves with this stuff? Why can't we just bring the drag queen into your kids' story hour? They're not doing anything. They're not hurting them. And just like you said, though, I mean, this is where we have to stop looking at everything as just non-aggression, because yes, I could bring my 14-year-old stepson to not that I know where a crack house is, but if I did, I could bring him to a crack house. I could sit down with the friend, smoke some crack. We could all leave, and I could say with a straight face, no one aggressed on anyone there. But
I didn't even give my son any crack. I just smoked it around him. I put it in the environment.
That's what I'm saying. I mean, I'm not saying I would do that, but one could do that. I've never smoked crack, to be clear. One could do that and claim with a straight face that they did not violate any libertarian principle of any kind because no one got hurt. They're exchanging in free trade. Your son was just there witnessing a free market business transaction, so that's a wonderful lesson for him. Meanwhile,
we walked home. I didn't even drive.
Didn't use the driver's license, so don't worry about that. I mean, but any rational person would look at that and say, you are insane. And you put your kid in a horrible situation. So I think libertarians need to sort of snap themselves out of their ideological stupor sometimes and actually just look at the real world and look at real people and how real people would very rationally react to a situation like that. Of course, you don't want to bring a kid to a crack den. You don't really want to go to a crack den, period. But if you're someone that goes to a crack den, you definitely shouldn't bring your kid.
That is the PSA for this episode.
Yes, don't take your kid to a crack den. Coming up, my final segment with Marc Clair, host of the Lions of Liberty podcast. You're listening to The Charles Love Show on AM 560, The Answer.
The Charles Love Show continues on AM 560, The Answer. Here's Charles Love.
Welcome back. I've reached my final segment with Marc Clair, host of the Lions of Liberty podcast. And in this segment, I asked him what we could do to change the culture and change the course of our political landscape.
So what do we do? What do you do? How do we guide people to the promised land, as it were? How do we get them to wake up and see what's really happening?
Well, that is the great conundrum, I guess, Charles. And, my solution has been similar to yours. It's grab a microphone and try to reach people and try to bring this conversation to people. I wish I had a snap my fingers and everything is better solution, but I do know that to get anywhere, to even have a slight hope, good men, and I say men colloquially, I'm including women in this, whatever. Good people need to band together and stop pussyfooting around what is going on in the culture and stand up for it. Because like you said, this is not a majority. This is a minority pushing it on a majority. So we need to gather the majority and stop them from being so afraid to speak up about the things that they're seeing. We need to stop being afraid of speaking out against obviously horrible things, like pushing drag shows onto children, regardless of pushing sexuality on children. Like, I interviewed Dave Smith the other day on Lions Liberty, and it was pretty funny. He said, there are some libertarian at Reason wrote some article. Well, technically, drag shows aren't inherently sexual, and he's like, well, yeah, we could imagine some drag show where it's like Robin Williams dressed up as Mrs. Doubtfire or something like that, and maybe that's not sexual, but that's not what we're responding to right now. So let's snap ourselves out of this theoretical and respond to the things we're actually seeing happen and actually seeing pushed upon children, and speak out against it, even if it doesn't violate some philosophical ideology, some strict non-aggression principle. There's something even higher than that, which is just what is obviously right and wrong. And we need to gather people and find those people that agree with us, which I think is more than less, and gather them politically in some way. Now, I think most political action is going to be a lot more effective locally, getting involved in your local school board to stop whatever insanity is going on in your school, or getting involved with your city council to stop whatever's going on in your town, because that's really where most of the actual power lies. I think a lot of the stuff on the higher level, national politics, this sort of thing is more of a distraction than anything else. And I think, but it's also where all the energy and money flows. So, that's a conundrum that's always hard to deal with, because local politics doesn't seem as sexy, doesn't seem as fun. I'm guilty of it too. I talk about what the Libertarian Party is doing nationally, because that's what people are talking about. So it's sort of a trap for people in media, where you want to cover what people are talking about, but also maybe what people are talking about is more of a distraction. So it's kind of the constant battle, I guess, like people like you and I have to wage. But at the end of the day, like what I always talk about now is that most of the solutions, everything starts at home. And literally in your home, and your first home is your body and your mind and your spirit. And so, like, for so many people, it's the harder answer, but it's the true answer. That's where you got to start. You got to start with yourself, putting yourself in a better position, being a better person, putting your family in a better position. But if you do that for yourself, if you put yourself in a better position, you put your family in a better position, now you're more of a pillar of your community, and now you're going to influence your community more. And that's how you're going to have a real effect in life, is by being a better person, being a more commendable person. And then people are going to beg to listen to you, because they're going to want to know, why are you doing so well? Why are things working out so much better for you? Well, here's why. And maybe then I'll tell you a little bit about my political ideology, but I think we got to put that on the back end and work more on ourselves, our families, our communities, because that's really what matters at the end of all this.
He is Marc Clair, host of the Lions of Liberty podcast. Marc, thanks for joining me.
Charles, thank you so much. Take care.